Hi, I'm Steph, and today we're going to be looking at how to make randomly generated NPCs or custom characters in Maya and Unity. This is going to use very little code, and we're going to focus mostly on swapping out meshes on the skin mesh render components of our game object in Unity. So we're going to start with a character, like this one here, rigged in Maya. And some starting rigging notes, we've got our mesh, which is actually meshes are referenced in, and we also have a pretty simple rig, but all of it bakes down to a single joint hierarchy, regardless of rig joints used in the rig, which would be in this group. Um, so for this character, the way we are approaching this is by having two versions of the same character. In this version, you can see that we have all the possible versions of outfits and components that we want to have our NPCs be able to be generated with. This could also be used for swapping out different pieces on a main character or some sort of like costume or inventory system. The important step here in Maya is when we go to skin our character. So when we want to, this character is already skinned, but if we wanted to skin a character, we would need to select our skeleton and select our meshes. And when we go to skin, bind skin, the important option here is this one, remove unused influences. We want to have this not checked on so that all of the influences of the bones are applied to all of the meshes. This isn't very efficient for animating in Maya, but we won't really be doing that on this instance where there's a lot of meshes. And you can get around that by using proxy meshes or some other solution. So it won't really affect, or using an entirely different animation rig and skinning. So it doesn't really matter, but we want all of these bone influences on every single mesh, as it makes this just a lot simpler to deal with in Unity. So we have this version that has all of the meshes we want, and they're skinned, and it's looking okay, not great, but when you do it, you can do a better job than I did. So along with this, we will also have our in-game version, which you can see does not have all of the extra meshes. It just has one instance of every item. So hat, glasses, eyebrows, face, etc. So this way we have a character or a version of the rig that will appear in game with a single mesh renderer for each that we'll use to swap the meshes out on. So for both the previous rig and this one, we will just export the skeleton and mesh to an FBX. And we will need animation. You should bake animation, deform model skins, blend shapes if you have them for the face, or anything else you might be blend shaping. Constraints, maybe. Skeleton definitions, yes. You don't really need any of these other things. And we just simply export this. So you can see we have the full version and the just this version. So great. And now we will jump over to Unity. So in Unity, we've brought over our characters and we've written some scripts already. I won't be going too in-depth about the code. It's all relatively simple. It's essentially automating something that you can do by hand and uses scriptable objects to manage what can become kind of numerous meshes and materials for these characters. So if you were to do this by hand, you can open up our character here and come to a skinned mesh renderer, and in the mesh slot, we can just switch that to anything that our full version of our character has, and it'll just swap out. If I pick one that is different, it'll swap out. So you can really easily swap these in and out this way, but it can become time consuming. So we're going to automate this task. And the way we're going to do that is with a generator script, which is here. and a item randomizer that is on each of the skin mesh renders that we were trying to affect and randomize. And those have references to an NPC item data scriptable object. If you're not familiar with scriptable objects, they're an incredibly powerful part of Unity. They just allow you to hold arbitrary data as physical assets in the Unity project. So we've created a scriptable object for each one of the components on our NPC character, and there's some options. You can add whatever you need for your specific project, but I like to have something to differentiate a skin material from a cloth material. Obviously the mesh that we're going to switch to. Sometimes use an alternate mesh for stuff like arms, so there's not so much overlapping. We might have a version of the arms that is just hands. And similarly, item materials for the meshes. So once those are created and filled out, they can just be slotted in on this script. We can jump into some of this. Scriptable object, very simple, just an array of meshes, some booleans for features. And then we have the item randomizer that essentially just goes with a for loop through each mesh and switches them around for whatever we need, changes the mesh, changes the material. Pretty basic. And then we have the generator that handles all of the randomizers in a list and loops through and just calls this function on each of the mesh renders. Pretty simple stuff. And what I do is I add a context menu item for randomize. If you want to get fancy, you can add a button to it. And when we hit randomize, boom, it will just randomize our character and the meshes, the materials. You can see that there's a skin material for the skin and a cloth material for the cloth. These are all just kind of placeholder material work for this demo. And as you can see on some of them, the way how some of the arms, like the full-length arm, will clip through a long-sleeve shirt was kind of a shortcoming with some of our modeling design, and you can overcome that by having your randomizer take that into account. But on versions of this idea that I am moving forward with, a lot of it is just making smarter modeling decisions so that you can have fewer mesh renders that you're messing around with, and it alleviates a lot of the clipping, intersection, interpenetrating mesh issues, which with the time saving that you're getting from this, you could just really easily go in and change the one mesh render for the parts that are interpenetrating. But anyway, so that's that. And when you're happy with something with a character, and we can hit play, and it animates just like it would without, if it was just one of the default assets. And any of these different versions should work. All of these different meshes know all of the bones in the skeleton. All of the bone orders will remain correct. And personally, what I like to do is generate NPCs in a scene and then prefab them out rather than generating them at runtime. Because you can either use RAM to generate them at runtime, or you can use storage and have them in your game ahead of time. And I find the latter to be preferable for what I've used this for so far. So yeah, you can even get a little bit more optimization. There are ways to combine all of these skin mesh renderers into one. That's a topic for another day. But there you have it. With some simple settings, some simple code, you can randomly generate some NPC characters for your game. Thanks for watching this video.